And welcome to WizeUp. I'm Paul Arthur. Today I want to talk about equalization and transfer payments and some of Alberta's grievances with Ottawa. So before we dive in there, a quick reminder to hit subscribe if you enjoy the program and tell your friends about us as well. As Albertans, wow. We dish out a lot of money in equalization payments to other, have-not provinces like Quebec. Thinking they have some things, don't they? So is that fair, and do some things need to change here? Our guest today thinks, change would be good. We're honored to have Dr. Ted Morton with us. He is, of course, a former Alberta Conservative cabinet minister, one of the co-authors of the famous Alberta Firewall Letter, and vice president of Fairness Alberta. You can check out their website at fairnessalberta.ca. So great to have you with us, Ted.
Good to be with you again, Paul.
Yeah, wow. Why don't we just dive in and start with the issue of equalization payments? Although, there's some other issues that go along with this, aren't there? And we'll have to touch base on those here today as well. Equalization, every time I try to decipher it, it seems to get more complicated than it was the week before. I don't know. Can you explain to us, how this works? How does the formula work?
I don't think I can explain it in enough detail to make that anybody who's listening would want to stay tuned. Equalization is based on what's called the fiscal capacity of each province, the ability based on their GDP and their ability to raise revenues. That's their fiscal capacity, and based on that, then the equalization program is supposed to try and ensure that their relatively equal delivery of various types of health and social services, that the provinces with less fiscal capacity, the poorer provinces, can have something roughly equal to what the rest of Canada. So it's sort of a leveling formula.
Okay. So very, very socialist in nature in that sense, I guess. And that changes, though, from year to year, doesn't it? Because each province's economy will have change, right?
It should change. That was one of the grievances when Alberta went through some very difficult times in the teens, the past decade. A lot of it related directly to the energy or the anti-energy policies of Justin Trudeau. We ran up a bunch of deficits, but we're still paying into equalization. So that's one of the grievances that's there. But I think it's important for listeners to understand that equalization are payments that they're taken out of our tax revenues that go federally, but then the equalization payments go directly to other provincial governments. Okay.
Yeah. So unpack that. Yeah. How does it actually work? So there's a formula. So we have X amount of dollars.
That both our personal taxes and our corporate taxes go to Ottawa. And then the equalization program, which is about a $20 billion a year program, checks are written directly to the have-not provinces.
So basically, we're not actually doing a specific, accountants here in Alberta saying, okay, this much is going to equalization payments. Rather, it's just a big lump sum. Basically, all the taxes go to the federal government, and they sort it out there and distribute to which provinces they think need it.
Based on the formula on fiscal capacity. But the weird thing is that there are two other similar programs. One's called the Canada Health Transfer. The other's called the Canada Social Transfer, which also are taken directly out of federal tax revenues, including the taxpayers and the companies in each province send to Alberta. Those are also direct cash payments to provinces that are below average. So equalization, Canada Social Transfer, and Canada Health Transfer their net transfer is out of Alberta is only about $6 billion a year. That's still a lot of money, but but that's only a small portion of the overall net loss of revenues from Alberta, because there are other programs, specifically the Canada Pension Plan and the Employment Insurance Plan, that take out much where we pay in as individuals, much more into our pension, Canada Pension, and our employment insurance than we take back. because we have a relatively younger workforce. We've had high levels of employment. The younger workforce, higher levels of participation in the workforce. So the actual net annual net loss from Alberta to the federal government, partly through equalization and social transfer and health, but also through these others, has averaged between $15 and $20 billion a year for the past 20 years.
So big picture, that's a huge.
Yeah, so it's a lot. Equalization is only one part of a larger transfer puzzle, and it's actually kind of a rather small part. Like the net loss to Alberta there is only around $3 billion a year. Throw in the Canada health and social transfers, another $3 billion. There's another 10 or 14 billion dollars that are leaving Alberta every year as part of this, depending upon what the Alberta economy is doing, anywhere from as low as 15 billion a year to as high as 24 billion a year.
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out. Our viewers need to know that. Well, I think most of us aren't aware of that.
We probably put everybody to sleep already, but it's a lot of money, because remember the entire Alberta budget for this year, I think is I wrote it down somewhere. It's like 70.
Like 70 billion sort of thing?
It's a little over 70 billion with a projected deficit of 5 billion.
So this extra 20 billion that's going out the window, we could use that.
Because of lower oil and gas prices compared to last year, 2024. In 2025, there's a net deficit projected for Alberta for this year, and yet we're still going to be paying in, when you put all these different types of transfers together, we're still going to be paying in probably not 20, but certainly more than 15 billion a year. I think that's, among other things, what has people not very happy, particularly in light of what happened 6 weeks ago in the federal election.
Yeah, and then so when our oil revenues start to drop off, when the price drops, whatever it is, and that fluctuates, of course, but it can hit our sector pretty badly here sometimes. And so do we ever become a have-not province, and do we ever actually receive any equalization payments, or does that basically never happen?
Not in my lifetime or your lifetime. And I would doubt. There's at the risk of, stop me if you don't want me going down this road, but there's a bigger problem for Alberta that Canada's political constitution is totally out of sync with our economic constitution. The political constitution was written 150 years ago, basically for Quebec and Ontario. And they had all of the MPs in the federal House of Commons then, and they still do today. They have 200 members of parliament. A majority is 172. So Liberals can win elections, and in fact, they did 6 weeks ago, just in Ontario and Quebec. I think what did they end up with? 170. They're too short of a majority. They have 170 MPs. 2 out of every 3 of those MPs are from Ontario and Quebec. Yeah. So that's how you win elections, is keeping Ontario and Quebec happy, and particularly Quebec, given the separatism and all of that. And flip out to the west. How many seats did the Liberals win in Saskatchewan and Alberta? I think 4, I think. 3 in Alberta, or 2 in Alberta, 1 NDP, and 1 in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
The Liberals don't need votes from Saskatchewan and Alberta to form governments. So they've developed a strategy that works, and it's kind of brutal, but these are not my words. This is Pierre Trudeau's campaign manager in the 1980 election. That's when you were around for that, NEP, 1980-81. That's when Trudeau brought in the National Energy Program, which hammered Alberta for the economy and all people, mortgages, jobs, everything for the next 4 or 5 years. He was caught off camera, but it's been documented. He said, "Don't worry, Pierre, we're going to win. We're going to screw the West and take the rest. Screw the West and take the rest." And a little colorful. But that's on the record, and in a certain sense, they've been maybe more polite since then. But that's kind of been the Liberal strategy in my my 45 years in Alberta.
Yeah.
They don't need votes from the West, and we're voter rich. Excuse me, we're resource rich but voter poor. Ontario and Quebec are voter rich but resource poor. So how do you win elections?
Yeah, yeah, and it's in this whole formula, basically, if I'm understanding correctly, and I think many Albertans would feel the same, it's really politically motivated,
Well,
more than
if
I
you
can. Yeah, I mean,
if you had an economist on, they could give you an economic explanation
yeah,
of equalization and all the other transfers. And there's an internal logic to it. I'm a political scientist,
yep,
and
yep,
also, for better or for worse, a decade in actual 10 years as a politician as well.
yeah,
But I'm giving you the political take on it. And the political take, I think, is captured by the Trudeau manager back in 80-81, screw the West and we'll take the rest. It worked in
yeah,
the 1980
yeah.
election, and it worked for Justin Trudeau twice.
Well,
And the question
part
is,
of
what's Carney going to do? We don't know. We're into a very interesting, the next summer and fall, the next 6 months are going to be very
oh,
interesting.
very much so. Yeah, I mean, he's saying one thing, but will he actually follow through on that? Practically speaking, on the energy issues, compared to climate change. I mean, one of my issues with all this whole equalization thing is that it is socialist in nature. So, are we? If Alberta is subsidizing other provinces, and especially Quebec, are we simply rewarding poor fiscal management and a lot of overspending, if you will, and if we're rewarding that, then of course that behavior is not going to change. It's just going to continue, isn't it?
Because it brings in more money.
Yeah.
So in all sorts of areas, Quebec has very interesting opportunities in the natural gas area. All of the natural gas that's been discovered in the last decade using directional drilling and fracking in New York, Pennsylvania, that sort of northeastern U.S. That same formations go up in Quebec. Quebec has lots of opportunity there to develop their natural gas. They don't want to do it. They say they don't want to do it for environmental reasons, but we all know natural gas, when it replaces oil or coal, is a net win on emissions. But they also don't want to do it because they'd get less in equalization.
Oh man, that really bites. Oh my.
Well, it creates an incentive for some provinces not to develop or to keep and the same thing. And Quebec spends more per capita on healthcare, education, social services, and everything. And the more they spend, the more.
Yeah, it's almost again a little bit of that welfare, tension that's there. Some people genuinely need welfare, and we're not going to, be mad about that. But there's some people who, could be working, but they'd rather be in welfare, and and I think that irritates a lot of people.
It's pretty well established that taxpayers get more for their money if the politicians who are making the decisions about their health care, their education, their environment, neighborhood safety, the closer those politicians are to the people that are paying taxes, the more accountable those politicians are. And what's happened in my adult lifetime, since the late 70s is more and more of all of these areas that we're talking about, health and social services, are areas of provincial jurisdiction.
Yeah. So,
but the federal governments come in and say, "Look, we're going to help. We're going to help pay you for that." But the minute they come in and start to pay, then they can attach conditions, and then you get the one size fits all, which again doesn't work, and you get the problem of gaming the system, either at the governmental level, which I would say, well, I won't say Quebec is game. Well, Quebec takes advantage of its opportunity on these things, but also then down at the actual individual level, people can game the system in terms of claiming unemployment and other types of benefits when in fact they don't need it because the people who are writing the checks aren't anywhere near.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, I guess. Yeah. Now again, provincial jurisdiction, for example, healthcare, that sort of thing, social services, education. So it would make a lot more sense, wouldn't it, if we could do something like Quebec is doing? They collect their own taxes, And maybe we just don't have to send them all to, Ottawa. We could use some of those taxes ourselves for those areas. Any thoughts on that?
Well, this is the gist of, you mentioned that I was one of the authors of the Firewall Letter, the Alberta Agenda Letter back with Stephen Harper at that point before he went into federal politics, before he became prime minister. And we saw this structural vulnerability for Alberta and Saskatchewan already pretty clearly then. And in the Firewall Letter, we recommended some structural reforms which would give Alberta and, any province, if they followed them, more leverage in negotiating fairness or a better deal with the federal government. And those included collecting our own taxes, which Ontario and Quebec already do, having our own police force, which Quebec and Ontario already do. Excuse me, Ontario has its own police force. I don't think Ontario collects its own taxes. Right. Quebec does. And then, of course, the big one in terms of money, and this then connects back to the transfers and equalization, is having our own pension plan. Every province, when the Canada Pension Plan was created back in the 50s, it made a provision every province could have its own pension plan. Quebec is the only province that opted for it at the time, but it's there for other provinces.
Yeah, no, I don't think Fairness Alberta, actually, your organization takes a clear stand on that, but just from your own personal view on that, would that be a good idea for Alberta? I know Albertans have been, somewhat scared of that, although I just saw a recent poll on that actually showed, I think it was like 55% of Albertans are actually seriously considering that might be a good idea. So, your thoughts there?
Well, I favor it, and I think post-federal election and the disappointment that the Carney and the Liberals won again, and they won again because of Ontario and Quebec. Well, they won because of Donald Trump.
There's some truth in that.
This is the tragedy of what happened in the last 6 weeks ago, is that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives were set to win. For the last year and a half, they've had a 20-point lead. But then between Trump and then Trudeau leaving and Carney coming in, the whole question changed. It was no longer a referendum on the Liberals and their anti-energy and very destructive economic policies, particularly destructive for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland, but also harmed the rest of the country as well. Suddenly, instead of the referendum being, do you want another 5 years of liberalism, it became who's going to defend Canada against Trump. Everything changed in 5 weeks.
And oddly enough, those retaliatory tariffs from Canada to the U.S., where'd they go?
Well, I'd say I think Premier Smith and the other premiers are going to give Carney a honeymoon or a trial marriage. Maybe trial marriage is better. To see if he begins to rebuild the bridges that Trudeau built or burn. But also she's announced that she's striking. I think it's called the Next Committee. Okay. And the Next Committee it's sort of a redo of the Fair Deal Committee that Kenny did 4 or 5 years ago. I think she's going to be part of the committee. Some MLAs, and they're going to go around the province for town halls and listen to people. What do they think about things like a pension, Alberta pension, about policing, collecting our own taxes, or others? And so there's obviously a lot of pent-up frustration / anger post-election, and I think, and again, it goes back to what I said 10 minutes ago. Government's closer to the people that pay taxes. Listen.
Yeah, for sure.
Because they have to, because the taxpayer is also the voter. And so I think Premier Smith and some of her MLAs are going to be around the province listening, and they're going to hear a lot.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly going to be some loud voices here. Of course, the Alberta separation movement is, going full steam ahead. I chatted with, Jeff Rath, I guess, a few weeks ago there on this. And again, he's saying they already have more than enough signatures ready to roll here to kick off a referendum. So there will be a referendum, I'm quite convinced. Now, I'm not convinced that a majority will actually vote for separation. I don't know. I mean, that could happen, I guess. But there's lots of momentum going there. Any thoughts on that? I mean, is that basically? Alberta somehow has to get some leverage, right, to twist the ear of the federal government, like Quebec has. So it's probably a necessary thing, isn't it?
I want to say, for the record, I've said, I myself am
Yeah.
not a separatist, but I'm also, and for the past 5 years at least, since Jack Mintz and Tom Flanagan and I published this book. I don't know.
Oh
If
yeah,
you've
just hold
seen
it up
that.
there a little bit to your other side. There we go. Yeah, moment of truth. Okay, yeah.
Moment of truth. We say very clearly in the conclusion to that, none of us are separatists, but all of us say the status quo must go. And that was 5 years
Yeah.
ago. And that we're only halfway into the decade of Trudeau anti-energy, anti-oil and gas policies. Things have gotten even worse in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So we're not separatists, but we need leverage. And the beneficiaries of the status quo, I think I think everybody who's listening will understand this. The people who benefit from the status quo, which is the Liberal Party of Canada and certainly the government of Quebec, and to some lesser, but still government of Ontario, the beneficiaries of the status quo don't give up their benefits willingly.
No, that's right. There has to be some saber rattling here of some kind, but
Asking politely doesn't work. And we say this in the book. The three of us and hundreds, thousands of other Albertans, the baby boom generation, that's part of what I am. We've spent the last 30 years fighting for changes, for a fair deal, for a better deal. We've failed. It hasn't worked. Things in this book, Moment of Truth, we document that things are worse off today in 8 different areas, equalization and transfers is one, than they were 40 years ago. So the next generation, which is Danielle Smith and a bunch of those people up in her caucus, they need a different strategy because what we did didn't work. And none of us favor separation, but the paradox is we may have to go a couple steps down the road towards separation to get, as you said, the leverage, the bargaining leverage, to get the beneficiaries of the status quo to accept. It's in their interest to accept the changes.
Yeah,
laws.
Because there's so many factors in here, other than just even the equalization, as you pointed out, the Canada Health transfer and so forth, social transfer. And again, we have a younger population here, so people might argue, well, Alberta should pay their fair share then. They've got younger people, et cetera, or whatever. But you know what? Younger people also come with their fair share of costs. Suddenly, hey, who has to pay higher education costs? Build more schools, right? Build more roads, people coming here, moving here, all these kinds of things. They should be part of the, factoring into the whole equalization payment. And I'm not sure if they are. I'm kind of doubting they are because, again, we're not getting a big, portion like we should be from all the tax dollars we're paying in and then getting the money here for health care, all that kind of stuff. It's not lining up, is it?
Yeah. So who gets stuck every time a provincial government runs a deficit and then builds up provincial debt? That's leaving unpaid bills to your children and grandchildren. It's completely unfair. And again, I think part of the frustration / anger since what happened 6 weeks ago is that Alberta was debt free thanks to Ralph Klein and some very difficult years of budget cutbacks. Alberta by 2005 was debt free, and we stayed debt free through the Stelmach years. I was there with Stelmach. Most people know he and I had our differences about the budget, but we did not run it. We could have, and should have done a better job than we did. But we didn't run up any new debt. But then after the minute Stelmach left, the next 3 governments, partly of their own fault, partly because of the recession and we ran up $80 or $90 billion worth of debt. Now it's back down to, I think, 40 or 45 billion. But this year's budget, the budget 2025 for Alberta, is a $5 billion debt. And so I think, as I said, what happens next is even more important to the younger generation than it is,
Well, quick question.
We're headed somewhere
Yes,
else.
I mean, somehow
And
we've got to
they're
get our change our collective Alberta mindset and Canadian mindset to, can we actually go back to the way my parents functioned? If they didn't have the money, they didn't spend it. They saved it first before they bought the next car or whatever it was. Can we actually, suffer a little bit, if you will? I mean, nobody likes that term, but how do we ever get to a place where we can operate debt-free and actually then have some success? Is that possible in this country?
Well, for the reasons we've just discussed, there's a system that our political constitution is out of sync with our economic constitution. We have a constitution that was written in 150 years ago in 1867 to take care of Ontario and Quebec. And they had all the MPs then. They still have all the MPs. Like I said, they're 170 MPs. 2/3 of them came from Ontario and Quebec. And they win elections by moving money from the resource-rich, voter-poor West to the resource-poor but voter-rich Central Canada, Ontario and Quebec. And that's like built in stone almost. And to challenge that, asking politely for fairness isn't going to work.
Okay.
For leverage,
So
change requires.
yeah. So do you believe, just briefly, is the UCP on the right track here again, allowing a referendum and just kind of pushing and making some demands, saying, hey, look, you've got to.
I think so. I think Premier Smith has done a good job of saying, on the policy side, here are half a dozen policies, Trudeau policies, that are directly targeted at the oil and gas sector, whether it's pipelines or emissions caps, things like that.
Okay, yeah. Got to leave it there because of time, but really appreciate just hearing, your sense of what's going on here. Dr. Ted Morton, our guest, and again, check out a very interesting website again, fairnessalberta.ca. All right, thank you for watching. Again, check us out at WizeUp.ca and hit subscribe as well. Thanks so much.